Okay, so in this series of video lectures, we're going to be talking about a whole big grab bag full of topics. And we're going to be talking about incentives and motivation and culture and all sorts of stuff out there. So it's all kind of tied around together around what gets people to act in a certain way. And the first thing we might start with is, well, what is an incentive? An incentive is something that is going to motivate people to act. And so we might think of carrots or we might think of sticks. So the idea here is incentives motivate action. And often when we talk about incentives, people immediately assume that we're talking about economic incentives. But, that's just one possible case there. In general, we want to notice that incentives could be external. That is, they could be things like money. So money is an external incentive. It could be things like social status. It could be leisure. It could be lots of things out there. So they're things that are not directly tied to the action itself. So these external are also called extrinsic sometimes. External incentives or extrinsic incentives or motivations. Or we could be talking about internal or intrinsic. And so these are going to be things like the satisfaction of the pride and satisfaction you feel in a job well done, or you get a warm fuzzy glow because you helped someone, that sort of thing. So feelings of, say, compassion, that kind of stuff. There's really kind of a middle ground here, say for instance. One way of looking at this is when you're talking to very, very small children, almost all of their motivations are external. They do good or bad things because they want the reward or they don't want the punishment. And then hopefully by the time people are adults, they've internalized some sense of moral code and all that kind of stuff. But then there's kind of a middle ground here where we might say that the incentive is social in the sense of, say for instance, something like shame. So if someone is ashamed, they don't necessarily feel bad until they're caught, but then when they do feel bad, when they are caught, they do feel bad, as opposed to someone who's guilty, who feels bad even if they aren't caught. So likewise, some people might be like, well, if someone gives me an award, then I get social status, and they don't care whether or not they deserve it. Other people might be, well, I did something good, therefore I feel good about it. But sort of halfway in between are people who don't feel good about it until they get a reward. But if you gave them a reward that they didn't actually deserve, that wouldn't feel good to them either. So there is sort of a middle ground here of people who are motivated by honor and shame. So they're taking into account both the internal and external. They need both before they can feel motivated. So this is at the broadest level of incentives. And then sort of when we get down into it, we often talk about weak versus strong incentives. This is not actually my particular favorite way of thinking about it. I prefer to think of it as some incentives are broad and unfocused, and some incentives are narrow but highly focused. So the idea here is something like a salary or an hourly wage is a weak and unfocused incentive. You sort of get paid if you show up and do your work, but exactly how well you do your work your wage or salary doesn't change if you do it really, really well versus not very well. So wages and salary are over here. And then something like piecework is over here. Piecework is a system where, every time you sell a set of steak knives, you get paid $2 or something like that. Or if you're paid on pure commission, that you don't get paid any wages at all, you just get a fraction of the sales you make, then you're over here. And many car salesmen are in that category over here. There could be sort of intermediate cases there where, say, for instance, you get paid a wage or a salary, and then you get a bonus if you meet your sales quota or exceed your sales quota. So wages plus bonus for exceeding quota. One thing worth noticing here is that generally incentives work at the margin. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's suppose we have some sort of situation where we have a sales force, and we think that the average sales agent can sell, say, $10,000 a month in product. Well, if sort of anyone can show up and do that pretty easily, there's not much incentive to pay a bonus. So we could sort of go, okay, let's pay someone 10% commission. And in that case, for every $1,000 they make above that $10,000, we pay them $100. So if they sell $12,000, then we pay them $1,200. So in that case, there's not a huge incentive actually to sell this extra $1,000 because that just gets me an extra $100. But instead, we could imagine setting up an incentive system where, say, for instance, we go, you're going to get 30% of everything over 10,000. So in this case, say, for instance, we might go, all right, if you can increase your sales from 10,000 to 1,200, then we're going to go ahead and give you an extra $300. And maybe we actually want to even do it maybe 50%. So that as you go from 10K to 11K, your commission goes from 0 to 500. And then as it goes from 11,000 to 12,000, it goes up to 1,000 and so on and so forth here. So essentially, there's no reason to offer a sort of piece rate incentive for what a sort of basic job is. You really want to concentrate the incentive for people who are performing way above average. Likewise, if you look at something like real estate commissions are typically a flat percentage of the house. So 6% split between buyers and sellers and their managers and so on and so forth, which kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You really would sort of want to go, okay, I think I can sell my house for $200,000, say, for instance. Well, instead of paying you 6% on all of that $200,000, how about, well, for every $1,000 you pay, you can sell it for above, say, $150,000, I give you 12% of everything above some sort of reasonable benchmark of what the house can be sold for. And in that way, you're actually giving a much stronger incentive for doing the thing that matters. Because sort of, any idiot could sell a $200,000 house for $150,000. Why should you pay someone 3% of that value to sell something for $150,000, which is just a total bargain price? Instead, you want to concentrate that incentive at the margin.